Drying cannabis is one of the most important things you're ever going to do on your harvesting journey, on your growing career. We're going to talk about the things that you're going to need to do to make sure your drying is absolutely perfect. We're going to talk about the conditions you're going to need. You're going to talk about how long it's going to take. We're going to go over pretty much everything that has to do with drying and why it's important. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Going from the long, strenuous veg stage into the flower stage, you are going to be taking care of that plant in the best way you possibly can. And come harvest time, everything changes about the plant chemistry, and we're going to completely flip-flop the environment it's in. We're going to be making it cool, we're going to be making it dark, and we're going to be making it relatively dry, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But as soon as you cut that plant down, no matter how you harvested, whether you're doing an ice bath to finish it off, whether you're doing flushing or leaching, whether you're doing a 24-hour cycle of light or darkness, or is it 48? I'm not exactly sure anymore. Irregardless, when we cut that plant off, a lot changes inside the plant. It's going to stop growing. It's going to be using the rest of its moisture to dry and in nature conserve the seeds that are inside of it so it can drop them off. And we are going to be having our THC start to be in a degrading process, and everything about the plant is going to start to die, and everything's going to degrade, where not even 24 hours ago, that plant was absolutely flourishing, and maybe it was getting towards the end of its life cycle. However, it had a couple weeks to go before it died naturally, which is the perfect place to harvest for THC potency and also terpenoid potency. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But when we get it into the drying tent, what conditions are we going to be looking for? We're going to be wanting to look for the numbers that people are using most recently that works the most efficiently in most cases. 99.99% of the time, you're going to want to try to get to a 60-60 type of condition, and that is humidity and that is temperature. Both are going to be 60. One's going to be 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the other is going to be 60% humidity. Now, I'm not sure how to translate to Celsius, but just Google the translation or do it in your head if you know how to do that, and keep it at that Celsius and that percent humidity, which would be 60 and then whatever it is in Celsius. You know, some things are better left unsaid, but sometimes I try to say them anyway, and it doesn't go very smoothly. But we're going to be wanting to put it in that condition. We're going to want it to be dark. Not only is this going to keep heat off of our plant and extra light stress that we don't want, THC will actually be degraded by light, and terpenes will start to evaporate, which are two things that if you want top shelf weed, you're definitely going to want to avoid. Those terpenes and that THC or other cannabinoid content is going to be key to quality cannabis. Bag appeal is always secondary. Secondly, you're gonna want an oscillating fan. Now, you can put it as low or high as you want, as long as you make sure you're not pointing it directly at the plants. That's extremely important. You don't want the wind stress, and again, you don't want to evaporate the terpenes, and you don't want to risk extra trichome or THC damage, making it easier to fall off the bud later in its crisp, dry state, or simply degrading the THC. I'm not exactly sure on the science, but you don't want to take that risk either way, because it definitely will destroy your terpenes and you're going to need those. The only reason you have a fan in there is to make sure that there's no stagnant air and places for water pockets, or you're still in risk for any kind of bug infestation to start. Even given the dark climate, they still like plants. That is an always. So you're going to want to make sure that bugs don't want to get onto your plants. You're going to want to make sure that water doesn't stay around your plants and that the air does not stagnate. Again, you are evaporating water from your bud, and that's how you're going to get the dry, but you don't want to dry too quickly with the fan pointing directly at it. We want to slow that process down as much as possible. That is key to the cure. So anything you can slow it down while optimizing your plant safety and health is a go. Now, once we get it in the perfect condition, finally, we're going to want to be waiting 7 to 14 days. Now, that seems like a long time for a dry, but keep in mind it's still on the stem or entire plant, depending on your style. We're completely allowed to do either way. I've grown great quality cannabis while cutting my plants completely apart, and I've also had great success in just cutting the entire plant down. It just comes down to preference, and if you are able to slow that dry down more, I suggest it. So if you can cut down an entire plant, that would be ideal, but not everyone has the room to, say, cut down an entire 20-foot outdoor plant. So that's a factor. The dry we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for a little bit of crispiness on the outside of the bud, showing that a lot of that surface is coming away from, the surface moisture is coming away from the bud, at the same time as retaining a lot of moisture inside of the bud. Now, the moisture inside of the bud is very important. You're going to want to see a little bit of a bounce back, and it's not going to completely crumple. It'll come back a little bit to shape, but it will be you'll be able to hear a crunch. And this is one of the few times you're going to be molesting your buds, if you will, during the actual growing process. But you can do it very minimally by checking some of the larger ones to make sure they are good to go into the jars, and then you'll already know that the smaller ones are, because on paper they would be drier, and you can normally count on that. When we're looking at the stem, when we're at the end of our dry, you're gonna want to hear a little bit of a crunch. Even if the branch doesn't necessarily snap, you're gonna want to see that it is dry and doesn't simply bounce back to formation, or it has a lot of excess moisture on it. You don't necessarily need to wait for the branch to snap, because in a lot of cases going into a cure, that is an over dry, especially if you have the extra time to be able to burp more often. I would rather have the hassle of burping more often than risking molding my bud because I didn't wait long enough, because again, patience is key. So I would rather burp extra and slow down that cure rather than dry it too quickly and then end up with low quality bud later as a result of that. So if you have the time to burp your buds more often than you normally would start, which normally I start at every 12 hours. So every half day I'm opening those buds, opening them for about an hour, closing them up, and then restarting the clock again. So that is normally where I start, and then it'll go to when the humidity gets too high, say it hits 65 relative humidity in the jar, and you need it to be at a 60. Take those out for about an hour. If they're sticking together and you're getting too much moisture locked in. But we have videos on that, and those will be in the link in the description below. So don't hesitate to check those out. Now, that pretty much goes over the entire dry. If you want to see the curing videos, go check those out down below. Otherwise, we have plenty of gardening videos. If you just hit my icon down below and go to my channel, you will be almost certain to see something you like. We have almost 450 videos on this channel alone, and I'm sure you can find something you enjoy. But until next time, thank you very much.